As it says, my name is Dr. Travnicek, and I've been thinking about sharing some thoughts that I've had about budgies over the last 60 or so odd years or more. And I want to talk a little bit about skeletal structures as opposed to feather in budgies, but I kind of want to start at the beginning. And so the first slide here shows you and budgigar, obviously a wild budgigar in Australia, around Alice Springs, going into a nest hole. And the reason I show this picture particularly is to let you know that there are people now that you can trust, I think, to take you out to find wild budgies. That is, as you know, a very seasonal thing. They're never exactly certain when the birds are there, but I was able to make connections with a guy in Australia, or around Alice Springs. His name is Jim Oatley, and he's a professional photographer. And certainly I saw birds by the thousands, when in point of fact I have heard at least secondhand that people had gone out and not been able to find birds at all, even though they came 10,000 miles to do it. So I can tell you that the birds that we are dealing with are originally thought to be 3 million years old, but many people think they're related to fig parrots and some other birds in Australia, and so they could be 4 million years old, maybe 5. So what birds that you're looking at when you go to Alice Springs is like stepping back in time 3 or 4 million years. So that's a very, very stunning thing. It is something that I must admit that can be life-changing for me, certainly being a lifelong budgie enthusiast. This is another picture by Jim Oatley taken around Alice Springs of a male budgigar. Now, the issue here is that the elements of exhibition budgies are in these wild birds. I know that's going to be hard to realize. I'm not using the right word, but anyway, hard to appreciate. But what I'm pointing out to you, would want to point out to you here, is that these birds are actually a sort of a small model of what the birds are today. So for me, what I want to focus on for the next half hour or so is a couple of things only, and those are substance, front line, back line, and sort of dimensions in the head skull, from anterior to posterior and then biparietal across the skull. So looking at this bird, I actually see a modern budgigar. I know this is going to be a stretch for you, but for anybody, I guess. So what I'm looking at now is a back line. And I think that's all we're basically going to talk about for the next half hour, are back lines and front lines, and then a front line. Now, this front line should come from here and go around here. And then that's the front line of the bird. Obviously, there's a hollow in here, and if you look at this bird and you carry the individual lines coming off the top of the off this frontal area here, you would think that it would go up here and then all the way around and then down the back. So when I look at a budgie, any budgie, I start there and I'm looking to see where this should go. So for me, in this wild budgie, there's a hole here, there's a hole here, there's a rather large hole or hollow area here. So for me, and I will talk about that in a minute, the front line's back line should be smooth and without any kind of holes in them. And for this budgie here, normally you think that an exhibition budgie, this chest area across the butt of the wing, should be the largest part of the bird for an exhibition standpoint. This bird was caught during the breeding season, so for an exhibition budgie, for me, he would be carrying a little too much weight. In 1951 or so, I started breeding these birds. This is the first depiction of an exhibition budgie that I saw, and I was stunned by it. This is from Watmo's Skeletal the Budgies, 1951 edition. This is Mr. Vowles, R.A. Vowles painting. And so what I noticed here, because I also appreciated the fact that the budgies I was raising, even sort of pet quality birds, that their heads were square, that there were differences in their heads, and also differences in the way they were sort of put together. But looking here, I want to start with the back line. Start again right here, there, all the way around. So this back line for me would be perfect. And the front line is basically perfect. I hate those words, but certainly I like lines that are clean and unbroken. And then I want to draw your attention now to something that I've not heard talked about much, but that's the position of the eye. And I'll show you some other birds. I hope I won't. Yes, I will. Where the early exhibition birds and the distance between the eye and the cere was not quite equal distance to the distance of the eye and the back skull or the top skull. And so now what's happened is, basically due to breeding, the back skull has increased in these birds, and so the eye has gone farther forward. But this bird would have been a standard budgie probably up until the 1970s, let's say, when all these mutations began to build back skull in the birds. That's a slightly different topic, usually different topic, but at any rate, I just think that when you look at budgies, I look for the position of the eye in the head to begin with. Now from here, also one measurement that I do visually, we're talking about visual measurements, not so much with a rod there, like a ruler. When I look at a budgie, I try to estimate the distance and the proportion between the eye and the butt of the wing. So that gives you that length that you need in an exhibition budgies to have a first-class, first-rate exhibition budgie. But again, here I want to emphasize something, that this head to me is not quite, but almost completely round. And that's how we used to term these birds, cock birds, but they had round heads. And now these birds don't have round heads anymore, or many of them, which is the sort of the subject of what I want to talk about. This is from Armour's book, Exhibition Budgies. And this book was also out of print, been out of print for a long time. Dr. Armour, I think, was a Scottish dentist. Don't hold me historically accurate on that. But the picture what I want to show you with this particular picture is the fact that in the 50s, this bird would have been bred in the early 50s or maybe even late 40s, that these spots are completely round. We had a lot of birds, the spots were completely round. Obviously the mask has been cleaned, but the spots were actually round, and eventually, due to what I think are long flight mutations and a number of these other things that increase, these mutations that increase the length of the feather in the birds, these spots all became elongated. But in the wild, and they're pretty much round. And then once we were breeding these birds through the right up until probably the late 60s or so, they were, and these long-flighted mutations and long-feathered birds came in, the spots were round. Also, I want to point out to this bird, to me, it's a little more square-headed, which I'll go into, but again, looking at the substance between the eye and the beak and the cere is, that shows a lot of what I used substance, which we have actually, as you know, lost that in a lot of these birds. Feather will overcome that. But if we want to criticize this bird at all, again, if you're coming out from here, you'd want to come up here all the way around. So he is missing some stuff up here. There's kind of a hole across here, because these back lines, like as in the Watt mouths and RA vowels depiction of this light green budgie this is all missing. So, but what I want to talk about here, this is also from Armour's book, Exhibition Budgers, and this is something that I was surprised to see in birds in Australia, at least some birds, and that is barring. So this is kind of a show fault that he was showing, demonstrating as a show fault, and multiple spots sort of as a show fault, but this barring or flecking or whatever you want to call it, this is something that is buried deep in these birds. And as I mentioned before, I saw a number of birds in Australia that were clearly adults that had various degrees of this sort of characteristic where the cap was not clean. But I also want to direct again the issue of spots, because these spots were arguably round. This mask would have been cleaned up. So if you pull this spot out, this spot is slightly teardrop, but this spot is probably round. And I can't really tell, but having been there and showed these birds and seen them shown, this was not unusual to have birds that had perfectly round spots. Again, just looking a little bit at eye to bill, cere. This is something I think that we have lost, and I do if I'm judging budgies, I do look for that a little bit. Look for that substance between the eye and where the eye is placed in the head. This was from the same book, and it was from Dr. Armour's book, Exhibition Budgers, and this is from the first exhibition picture of an exhibition budgie that I saw in my life, and it was because nobody had cameras and were taking pictures of much of anything. But what struck me in this bird, and to this day, is the fact that its backline, which is basically perfect. You can argue that these wings are up a little bit, but the head is square to me, and I'm going to build on that concept of square-headed birds and round-headed birds. But across here, the eye is centrally placed. For me, is a good thing. And then looking up above here, of course, it's not as great a distance, and from here to there, the eye again is pretty much centrally placed. So this bird, I began drawing this bird as a child, and I was I've been stuck in this notion this particular bird for the last, I would say, 65 years. Now, in keeping with we looked at the back line, we're looking at the front line as basically, for me, a perfect front line. And then the distance between the eye and the butt of the wing is what I sort of value, a thing that people don't talk about a lot, but I tend to look at it when I'm breeding birds. I tend to try to breed birds that maintain that length. This is another picture to isolate the bird and isolate the head and the skull structure. So again, coming up here, it comes up and then it comes across here more flat. Okay, it comes down the back and back down here. So I will show you some pictures of some round-headed birds in a minute, but my sense is for the last 60 or so odd, 65 years or so, I have been trying to breed this bird, a bird with a completely a square head as I can create, as I can breed, and then this distance between the eye and the sear is very important. Whether or not we can maintain that, I'm really pretty uncertain. I want to show you what this is the last picture of a square-headed bird that I want to focus on. Again, just taking away the rest of the bird, coming up here, basically squaring off, and then coming back down here. So that is a square-headed bird. This is the standard for the American Budgies Society somewhere around the 1990s, possibly, or well, no, 1980s. And this was a hen depiction, but that's not why I'm showing it because it's a hen. It's because it's a square-headed bird. And you can see just exactly what we were talking about before. It comes from here straight up, then kind of across, and then down the back. The only thing is here where we begin to have some loss of distance between the eye and the sear. So, but one of the things that, which is not in this sort of discussion, is what we've been able to do is use these massive feathers to overcome what would be a structural, to me, a structural fault. And the front line is perfect, and distance across here. And the posture, people don't talk too much about posture, but I do think, at least in exhibition budgies, when you're showing budgies and breeding budgies, we have to maintain almost 80 degrees. If this is 90 degrees, this bird is probably about almost 75 or 80 degrees or so from horizontal. Another picture of the same bird. This is a side view. And it sort of captures better the square-headedness of this bird. And that's really all I'm trying to depict here. Again, it does show the eye, for me, somewhat off-center, but most of that is due to these factors, genetic factors, that add back skull, top skull, to the bird. This is a bird. I just want to show you a few birds that I think of as square-headed birds. This is a gray cock, and the only thing, it's not a perfect picture, but it gives you the impression that this bird is square-headed. Also, there may be some weakness here between the eye and the sear, but in general, so this is a very nice square-headed bird. To me, this bird is leaning forward, probably off about 5 or so odd degrees from where you'd really like it. I like my birds and try to breed my birds completely off the perch. This is another square-headed bird that was shown, and I think this bird is won several times. This is to me, a much nicer, somewhat more vertical bird, showy bird. Really great distance between the eye and the shoulder, and then coming around here, going down the back. For me, basically perfect. And around the front bill, around the front, from the bill to all the way down the front to the perch. Basically, clean lines. Let's use the word clean lines. And then here is something that I think we've lost in other birds, and that is the distance between the eye and the cere. That really is again something that I think we've lost. This is another bird. This bird is from England. A friend of mine owns this bird, if it's still alive. I think this bird was best in show in England in one of the major shows. But this is another step in the square-headed bird saga. So the bird is coming out. It's not as good a picture as I'd like, but you can think about this bird and in your own birds and look to see how that matches your birds. Again, coming off the side, down the back, front line basically perfect, back line basically perfect. Yes, the wings are up just a little bit, and yes, there's a slight hollow. If you drew a line from here to here, there'd be a slight hollow. So the back is not exactly straight, but that is really not something that to me is a show fault. It's just a different characteristic. And in these birds, and in the exhibition budgies, they use that sort of swagger to gain some advantage on the bench. It's just inbred in them. This is a different bird. So we're going now from square-headed birds to round-headed birds. This also is from Dr. Armour's book, Exhibition Budgies. This is a plate. This plate was there to depict a fault that was rampant in birds in the 50s, 50s and 60s. Well, these 50s. That is this wing. The wings were carried high, and actually this wing was scissored, so this wing's over that wing, and they were called scissored wing birds. But what I want you to imagine, I'll try to cut this out, what I want you to imagine is this bird with wings on its back, but what I do want to talk about is this head skull structure. So the skull structure here, eye to the cere, and then eye to the back skull, eye to the top skull. And the skull structure is basically, for me, perfect. But this bird has, at least for me, a major fault, and that is it's laying over the perch. So it's not at a proper 80 or so odd degrees. So this is a major, to me, a major show fault, and also almost impossible once you go down that road to breed out of your birds. So the front line, again, going from here, is down here. So if you've looked at that from a exhibition standpoint, or even breeding, exhibition standpoint, this bird is a teeny bit overweight. It's just, it loses, if you do not carry this bill, the front line here, where this is the largest part of the bird, then it does spoil them for exhibition purposes. The main problem with this bird is it's for me, is its posture. I want to go back to the head again a little bit. I realize that's blurry, but that's just as well as the photograph could reproduce or blow up, and so lost little resolution. But again, the eye is basically in the center of the head, and top skull's here, and this is round. Now we used to call these, and again you see these spots. These spots are not painted. These are the real. These are this bird's real spots, and they all used to have spots like that 40 or 50 years ago. But we used to call these birds, the round-headed ones, bubble-headed birds. And I'm going to show you maybe one or two bubble-headed birds in a few minutes. So this is the American Exhibition Budgies standard from, again, about mid-80s, I guess. And it is a bird, modern bird, with what to me is a kind of a round, more of a round head. And again, the eye has come a little far forward, but again, you can argue that this is simply because the genetic factors that have been bred into these birds for this back skull is pretty dramatic. But just looking at the eye again, let's look at the front line, or back line, going around the back, absolutely unbroken. So if you're looking at budgies anywhere in your own budgies to buy, budgies to sell, budgies in your aviary, budgies at shows, I would just encourage you to clean the way you look, to simplify the way you look at birds, and look only at these lines and whether they are or not clean. This bird here has clean lines in front and the back, but this is the ideal, and I like that bird. I like birds like that quite a lot. This is a little bit more to the front. This is one of these sort of three-quarter frontal view. It's not quite three-quarters. I wish it was. We've lost our ability in standards, I think, to really have visual standards that are useful. These birds could be better depicted, I think, in pictures with front-on views, although now with photography, all this stuff here is made moot because you can take hundreds of pictures of these birds at every possible angle, and so you really understand them better. So here you're beginning to see a little bit of the feather. Feather is covering this eye, but therefore when it's covering the eye, it's covering any faults that might be in here, and weakness in the facial structure of the bird. And so then this again is, to me, completely round-headed, and a nice clean front line, and a very nice perch, very nice posture, again probably maybe 70 degrees or so from horizontal. So this is carrying this a little bit farther. This is obviously a violet cock, but there are people in England, and I also like them, that breed birds with completely round heads. So looking from this bird, obviously had much more frontal rise, much larger, longer, more dramatic top skull, more than adequate, well, very good back skull. So the bird for me, as a round-headed bird, is, a perfect budgie. Again, from the front and the front line, and then back line. This is a bird that's owned by a friend of mine. This picture was taken years ago. This is Jeff Bowley's bird. He shows a lot of these birds that tend to be, in my mind, round-headed birds, which I really like. So here, this is a hen, obviously. So this is going around all the way down to here. Well, so why is this hump here? Well, that hump is there because it would be better if it wasn't there. But what I want to emphasize now is one thing and one thing only, and that's round-headedness of this of this bird, and it's another round-headed bird. This is a bird that is also one of Darren Schnell's birds, and it was best in show years ago. But this is also a bubble-headed bird. At this point, these birds have gotten very, very big, where the heads are actually larger than the budgie, the bird itself. And we have gone to altered the standards for that, to account for that. But for me, when I see a bubble-headed bird like this, I'm looking on, actually back, can't really see it too well, but a little bit. Make sure that the shoulder and the upper body is big enough to carry the head in proportion. And while it is a bubble-headed bird, there's very nice length here. Beautiful long bird. And it's not quite, but almost vertical. I'd say that bird's about 85 degrees. And so I like the bird a lot. But it's there really mainly just to show you what a round-headed, super bubble-headed bird looks like. This was the bird that I showed you earlier, and it's related to that bird. But for me, when I'm breeding these birds, I'm trying to breed bubble-headed birds, or I'm trying to breed square-headed birds, and that's it. But from some pairs will breed both, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. But this is more of a square-headed bird. Coming up here straight, you see this huge frontal across here, which squares the head up. In a bubble-headed bird, because of the skull structure, this is not there. And can't be there because the skull structure isn't there. And so then the bird comes up here down the back, and it's a very nice bird, but for me, it is more of a square-headed bird. This is another bird, actually. This is Paul Stannard's birds. I got to talk to Paul, and he allowed me to use this bird. I like this bird a lot. Obviously, if he was somewhat longer here, he would be, it would be, for me, more useful. But this is another one of these sort of incredible bubble-headed birds where everything is going all in all directions, and I find that very, very attractive, and something that I recommend you and breed for. This is a different bird. This is one of Darren Schnell's birds, but this is what a square-headed bird looks like when it's about, let's say, 8 weeks old. And so you can see this skull structure right away when you see these birds. If you're looking at birds in an aviary, buying birds or whatever you're doing, trying to evaluate the aviary, when you see birds like this, I mean, this is a stunner. And the thing that makes this bird different than a lot of other birds, at least for me, as a baby, it's the difference between the eye and the shoulder distance. So this is going to be an incredibly long bird. And either it's sitting on a little feeder there, some sort of platform, but I think it's going to become a really nice, long, and upright bird, and have the right perch stance. I'm going to get back a little bit, do a couple of things, and I want to point out some more round-headed birds. There was a chap in England I bought birds from over the years, and he had wonderful birds, but his birds tended to be round-headed and cleaner and easier to prepare for the shows. But so this is a round-headed, to me, a perfectly round-headed bird, which I showed you, and I showed you one of the violets that I showed you in the earlier picture is one of his sons. But that's another one of his sons, and they were nestmates. And this bird here, from the same nest, to me, is a square-headed bird. You see this structure across here. Round-headed birds don't have that. And their eye buried underneath all these feathers, so it would be a little better if I could show you a little better. But I just trying to give you an impression of that quality of square-headedness in this bird. However, as I showed you earlier, this is actually his brother, and they were nestmates. So you can breed square-headed birds and round-headed birds in the same nest. These factors are all hidden inside these birds, and so I will discuss buying budgies in the next few days. And so when you buy budgies, you have to understand that the things that you buy that you see and the things that you buy and you don't see. But from this standpoint, again, this bird is a beautifully upright bird, probably around 80 degrees. Beautiful frontal rise, completely equidistant. And that's what the eye placement is for me just really important. This is another bird which I'm showing because it was from a major breeder in England. And it's a bird I bred lots and lots of birds. But the reason I bought this bird is because it not only is a beautifully proportioned bird, but pretty rare that you can buy a round-headed bird. And I bought this bird for that quality, and he produced lots and lots of incredible birds. This was one of them. Now, you can argue it's not an incredible bird. I'm not going to argue that at all. But I'm looking again at the eye. He had a really beautiful quality, and I'll go back to him in a second, but of the eye being in the center of the head. What people now are talk about is the amount of feather between the eye and the cere or bill. And so that is depicted in the standards, and that I think is something that makes these birds attractive. Because if you don't have that, the faces tend to get pinched. And this bird, I think, ultimately will become a round-headed or square-headed bird. I want to go back to you again. So this is this bird with this perfectly round head. Nice distance here, nice distance there, and that bird turned out to be a really useful bird for several years and did breed numbers of really good birds. This is a young square-headed bird, kind of similar to the other sky blue that I showed you. And what this bird is doing, now his skull structure is starting to grow. He's probably 5 months old, 4 months old. And now you begin to see this huge amount of feathers coming out the sides that are dramatic but are, for me, only available in square-headed birds. This bird died as a youngster, but the year that I bred him, which is 5 or 6, 7 years ago, I would say that was one of the better budgies I bred that year. And again, looking here, you just get a general impression of the length of the bird and general impression of length here, because if you don't, for me, for exhibition budgies, if you ever begin to lose length in your birds, that is something very, very difficult to overcome. This is another bird. This actually was a Darren Schnell bred bird, along with some birds that I acquired from Mr. Ball. At any rate, so this is to me, a really super bird. This bird did not eventually survive, but there are basically no holes in here whatsoever. And that's when I'm breeding these birds, and you're breeding your birds, just to make sure that the lines are extremely clean and there's no holes. Another picture of that same bird. Again, he's showing a little weakness in here, but I can assure you that this bird would have grown up and did grow up and filled all that in. The feathers fill a lot of things in, as you know. This is another one. What's different about this bird is it's a round-headed hen. It's a hen, baby hen, but for me, it's round-headed. And you get the impression it's going out the back. I can tell you this was a completely round-headed bird. and will develop quite nicely, but obviously lacks head size in terms, so it would be a bird would not be a first-class exhibition specimen, but certainly in terms of breeding round-headed birds, that bird would be extremely useful. These birds, these round-headed, square-headed birds, you can breed them in anything. This is a bird that came off of a pair of birds from Switzerland, I think it was, anyway. But this bird, this is a baby bird, and it went on to win lots of shows. But the impression the reason I'm showing you this bird is because it's a square-headed bird, so you can breed square-headed birds in recessives, you can breed square-headed birds in clear wings, you can breed square-headed birds in fallows, you can breed square-headed birds in anthracites, or round-headed birds. But that the selection that you have is whether or not they are square-headed and round-headed birds. Because of the factors I think that are needed, I have had some difficulty in trying to breed round-headed birds to square-headed birds over the last 50 or 60 years or so. How I tend to, once I have a line of round-headed birds, I take that line in one direction and I keep all my square-headed birds together. So again, this is a baby bird coming out from here and straight up over the back, straight down the back, and all the way down here. His wings are up, but I don't think he's been in a show cage. As a little add-on in this little program, I wanted to show you these birds that are called frosted pies. These birds were readily available in the 40s and 50s. They were all over the place. They're dominant, but they do not breed true. In other words, you could breed a bird like this, which is about a 3-year-old bird, from a bird with a single head patch. And then this bird could breed a whole bunch of birds that have a single head patch. But what is different about these birds is that their flights, many of them, are never white. And the tails are white with black quills. Again, that's a feature of these frosted birds. So this is a very good one. I've bred a lot better, but this also is a round-headed bird. So, but that's a frosted pie for those people who have never seen one. Hopefully you will not only see them, but if you can get your hands on them, they are one of the most satisfying and most beautiful birds, I think, in Budgies. This is another depiction of of a round-headed bird, and so I had a couple of nests of those. But just to go back to, and this is the last slide. This is a depiction of, well, it's a depiction of a picture of a very, very long, to me, very nice light green, but this bird is completely different than the ones I showed you last in this bowl, which is to me, more of a round-headed bird. This bird is, to me, completely square-headed, coming up here, straight up, straight across, and straight down the back. Now, it's got its head leaning forward, but it's only like 6 weeks old or so. So it's still in the nest box and still being fed by its parents. So that's sort of the end of the discussion of skeletal structure in budgies. But I just think that it's a new way, or possibly different way of thinking about birds. But what I want to do in the next few weeks is to, for the YouTube purposes, is to discuss things individually, such as buying budgies and selling budgies. And one thing I think the next tape I'm going to do is going to be something on buying budgies. That's, as we all know, the heart and life of your stud. So thanks for watching. If this is useful, why hopefully you are free to use this in any way you want. It's not copyrighted. There's nothing that is that you can no obligation to do anything, just to enjoy it. And if it's useful, hopefully it will allow you to breed better budgies. Thanks.